Hi, my name's Leonie West. Today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. On this piece here we have a seam allowance which is in cream. That is a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. The black is a quarter-inch seam allowance. The difference is 2 threads. You may wonder why such a small amount makes such a difference to your quilting. I have cut 2 9-patch blocks. Finished measurement will be 6 inches. The pieces were all cut at the same time. The difference is this block has been sewn with a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. As you can see, my half square triangles are square and measure 2.5 inches, and my quarter square triangle measures 2.5 inches. This block I have sewn with a quarter-inch seam allowance. You can see that my half square triangle is smaller than the 2.5-inch unit, and my quarter-inch triangle is much smaller. The more seams we add into our block, the more this difference between a scant quarter-inch and a quarter-inch makes. This is the block sewn with a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. Now that I have sewn the units into rows, you can see that my block, when I sew the rows together, is going to line up beautifully. I'm going to be able to nest my seams and get lovely intersections. The points of my triangles will still be in the correct position. This is the block that was sewn with a quarter-inch seam allowance. As you can see, this unit does not measure the same as the 2.5-inch square. My quarter square unit is much smaller than my 2.5 inches. When I go to sew these rows together, I will not be able to match my seams. This is the block that has been sewn with a scant quarter-inch seam allowance. As you can see, the points of my quarter square triangle are still in place. I have nested the seams. I'm going to flip it over, and I have spun my seam intersections to give me a flatter centre, to give me flatter intersections here. That makes it easier to quilt. This block here is the one that has been sewn with the quarter-inch seam allowance. I've nested the seam in here, and as you can see, it is not the same measurement here. Over here, the seam is slightly off. I've lost my point here. I've lost a lot of point here, a bit of point here. I've lost the point here. My seam doesn't meet here, doesn't meet here, here, or here. This should be a nice straight row across here. I'm dropping in here. This one is straight across. This one is out of place. If I flip this one over, you can see how little seam allowance I now have on this piece. Because my piece became smaller using the quarter-inch seam allowance, I have lost all this seam allowance. This will make my quilt quite unstable. I only have a couple of threads holding that fabric together. We really need our seam allowances to keep our quilts looking good and to make them last for years. So that is the reason why I use a scant quarter-inch seam allowance rather than a quarter-inch seam allowance. If you are unsure about the seam allowance you are sewing with, cut 2 2.5-inch squares, sew them together, press them. They should measure 4.5 inches, so you should be able to sew your pieced unit to your 4.5-inch rectangle. If you do not have a finished piece measuring 4.5 inches, then you need to adjust your seam allowance. You can do this by moving the needle so that you make your seam allowance narrower. Generally, this movement is done by moving the needle to the right. The westerly rulers were designed to tilt when you cut, and therefore you can cut 4 layers of fabric as I have here, or you can cut 1 layer of fabric without the fabric sliding underneath the ruler. Cutting 4 layers, the fabric has not moved underneath that ruler. Then, if I want to cut 1 layer, I'm going to straighten this, so I'll just put it over the rough edge of the fabric, hold it down from the front. The rulers are designed to be held from the front. Because it tilts, there is no movement on 1 layer of fabric, and as we all know, 1 layer of fabric is harder to cut than multiple layers because the ruler tends to slide more and the fabric also shifts. So when holding the westerly ruler, we hold it on the clear portion. As you can see, the ruler is tilting. If I put weight on the back of the ruler onto the black part, then my ruler is sitting on the black. I don't want that. I want the weight to be on the front. Because I'm not pressing as hard, I don't have to press as hard with the rotary cutter. If I'm cutting triangles, it is the same. Just bring the guide to the edge of the fabric and hold it from the front. Do not apply pressure on the back of the ruler. My triangle has not moved or shifted. Cutting the next one, I will just bring the point to the edge of the ruler and hold it down on the front again. I'm not putting any weight on the back of the ruler. And that's 1 layer, triangles cut without any ruler movement. To cut the puzzle pieces, we need to have our fabrics all facing right side up. So I have 4 layers of fabric all facing the same direction. I will now put my ruler, which is set at 4.5 inches, over the edge to straighten the edge and cut out 4.5 inch strip. Once I have cut the strip, I will then use a rotating mat, place my fabric on the rotating mat, and with my puzzler tool, I will just put the guide to the edge of the fabric, hold the tool down from the clear, make my first cut, spin the mat, the next cut, spin the mat. My first set of 4 pieces, and just repeat to cut out the piece. Each of the Stash Buster tools has had the points taken off, which will give you easy alignment. Lay out the puzzler pieces in the pattern that you want, and then bring right sides together, line up this edge and this edge, place a pin here, and do the same at the other end. Because the points are taken off, my pieces align beautifully, quickly and easily. Now stitch with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, then press out your pieces. Once you have sewn this seam and pressed it, you will then sew 1 unit to the next, make 2 rows, sew the rows together. I like to spiral out my centre seams, that way all my seams are actually pointing in one direction. It gives me a beautiful flat centre in the middle of my block. Hi, Leonie West from Westerly Design. In this video we will show you how to make a Dresden plate with our Persian point topper, and we will also show you how to make our Dresden plate with standard points. We are going to be using the 8-point Westerly Dresden plate. The advantages to the Westerly Dresden is that we have the locking fabric guide, and we can make 6-inch plates, 7-inch plates, and all the way to 12-inch plates. The plates are designed to fit inside a 12-inch block with about half an inch all the way around to the edge of the block. So I'm going to set this one up at 12, tighten the screws. I'm now going to cut strips of fabric to the same sizes from here to here. So I'm going to take the 18-inch adjustable ruler, put my plate upside down, loosen the screws on the guide. I'm going to put black to clear and black to clear underneath. Go to the other end and black touching clear, and I always come back and do the first end again. So now my ruler is set to cut strips of fabric the same measurement for the plate. I'm now going to cut a strip of fabric. This fabric already has a straight edge, so I'm just going to put the guide to the edge, hold it down at the front and cut my strip. For this plate we are going to cut 2 different fabrics and 4 plates of each. So I'm going to cut another strip of fabric, so my strips are cut. Now I will take my Dresden plate tool, put the guide to the edge of the fabric, hold the tool down on the clear, cut up one side. Because it's cut to the right measurement, I don't need to cut across the top, and come back and cut the other side. So I now have 4 plates in the purple. Do the same with our other piece of fabric. I find cutting this way much safer than cutting that direction. So it's as easy as that, and I've got 8 plates cut. For this block we are going to use the Persian toppers, and the Persian toppers come in a set of 4. We have 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch and 12-inch, so we can make all those size blocks with them. Taking the toppers out of their little tray, and you can see the 4 different sizes. So I'm going to use the 12. Just grab an ironing surface. I'm going to take freezer paper. I have 2 layers of freezer paper, and I'm going to press those 2 layers together. So I'm going to put shiny side to dull side. This gives me a firmer template to turn my pieces around. So I'm just going to press those together using a hot iron. Now that they're pressed together, I'm going to draw around the topper. You can reuse these a number of times just using a pencil. I will just draw around the toppers. I'm going to make 2 of these paper pieces. That will be enough to do all 8 points because I can reuse them. If I was making a quilt with a lot of plates in it, I would make more than 2 toppers, and then I could do 8 pieces at a time. So now I've drawn around that. Once I've drawn around my template, I am just going to cut on the drawn line all the way around the piece. This is going to give me a guide to turn over my fabric to give me the lovely Persian point top. We now want to cut our fabric away from around our template, and we're going to cut approximately 1/4 of an inch. This does not have to be accurate. This is going to be turned under. So we just take off those extra pieces. Because on the Persian we have a curve coming here and coming back into the point, this is our concave curve. When we have a concave curve, it does help if we put a couple of nicks into the curve, just 2 or 3. That will help that curve to come over. We can turn this over and press it over. I like to use starch, so I've just sprayed spray starch into a container. I have a paintbrush and I'm just going to dampen the edge of the fabric. Because the fabric is damp, it is actually going to curve easier for me than if the fabric was dry. It is also going to hold very tightly for me so that it's easy to stitch this down once we finish. So hot iron, I'm just going to bring my fabric over so it's pulling up against the edge of that template. Put the iron on it and continue up. Just using your fingers to manipulate it round, but as you can see, because it is damp, it actually turns over beautifully. So that side is done, and this is how easy it is to get that beautiful Persian top finish. And just keep going round with the iron until you've got them all turned over. And I just hold the iron onto the piece until it is dry, and I always press from the top side as well. Once we've pressed the top over, we need to remove the paper, and the paper just comes out by giving just a little simple pull. Because of the starch, it's kept the shape in there beautifully. So if you are making the 12-inch block, you use the 12. If you are making a 10-inch block, you use the 10. An 8-inch block, we will use 8 and 6. But as you can see, they all work the same way. You can lay out the blocks so that you can see how you'd like them to go together. This one I've alternated the colour, and this one I've put pairs of colours together. Laying them out makes sure that you don't get lost when you go to sew them together and sew them the wrong way together. So I pick them up, turn them over, align the top edge here, place a pin in here, bring the bottom edge together and put a pin in here. Now, if I pick everyone up with the top up and the light colour on the top, I will know when I get to the sewing machine that they are all facing the correct way. If I get to the sewing machine and I find that with the top up I have the purple on top, then I know it's not right. When I open them up that way, I will have 2 purples together. So I always make sure that I set up a system of having top up and the light purple on top. I have now sewn my pieces together. I've started on a waste fabric to take care of any